Over 2,300 years ago, the ancient Greek philosopher Plato introduced the world to the idea of Atlantis in his two dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. Atlantis was supposed to be the kingdom of Poseidon, gifted to him as his part of the world. The Atlanteans built a massive kingdom and an advanced civilization unlike anything we would recognize today. But it was all for naught, as they would be destroyed, their civilization buried, and their continent in the sea pulled beneath the waves. Today, we dig a little deeper into the lost city of Atlantis. Scholars and researchers debate the accounts of Plato and his story of Atlantis, as they have since the days of Plato himself. Some believe that Atlantis was an allegory, a myth developed by Plato to teach philosophy, while others claim it is some myth integrated with real history and events to similar ends. Either way, the arguments tend to boil down to one seemingly simple question: did Atlantis really exist? Plato's dialogues claim that his recounting of the Atlantean tale was based on the Athenian statesman and lawmaker Solon, who visited Egypt more than 200 years before the time of Plato. It is said that Solon translated Egyptian records of Atlantis. Let's begin by digging a little deeper into the accounts of Atlantis from Plato himself. To quote the Timaeus, "For it is related in our records how once upon a time your state stayed the course of a mighty host, which, starting from a distant point in the Atlantic Ocean, was insolently advancing to attack the whole of Europe, and Asia to boot. For the ocean there was, at that time, navigable. For in front of the mouth which you Greeks call, as you say, the Pillars of Heracles, there lay an island which was larger than Libya and Asia together. And it was possible for the travelers of that time to cross from it to the other islands, and from the islands to the whole of the continent, over against them which encompasses that veritable ocean. For all that we have here, lying within the mouth of which we speak, is evidently a haven having a narrow entrance, but that yonder is a real ocean, and the land surrounding it may most rightly be called, in the fullest and truest sense, a continent. Now in the island of Atlantis there existed a confederation of kings, of great and marvelous power, which held sway over all the island, and over many other islands also, and parts of the continent. Plato describes a continent in the Atlantic Ocean that was in front of the Pillars of Heracles, which was larger than Libya and Asia put together. He also describes multiple islands that were interconnected, and that were, in turn, connected to the main continent in the midst of the vast ocean, ruled over by a collection of kings. Plato goes on to detail some of the geological elements of Atlantis. It was said the main island or capital of Atlantis was mostly mountains on the north and along the shore, and that to the south was a great plain in an oblong shape that extended in one direction 3,000 stadia, or in modern terms approximately 555 kilometers or 345 miles. The central portion of the island was said to be 2,000 stadia across, about 370 kilometers or 230 miles. Many debate the interpreted dimensions Plato put forth and believe that perhaps his measurements were actually an Egyptian ket. A ket was estimated at just over 27 square meters. This would dramatically reduce the size of Atlantis as described by Plato. In addition, a stadia was defined as 600 Greek feet. However, the Greek foot was never standardized and varied between places, which could also alter the size claims put forth about Atlantis. However, Plato also made claims that the Atlantean army numbered around 1 million, which would imply an even larger civilian population on the islands. This population would require an area the size of Plato's original interpretation. Plato's tale continues with a recounting of how the Hellenic deities, or Greek gods, divided that land so that each deity might have their own piece. Appropriate to Poseidon, he was granted the island of Atlantis in the middle of a great sea. Poseidon then fell in love with Cleito, who gave birth to 5 pairs of male twins. The eldest of the sons was Atlas, who was made the rightful king of the entire island and its surrounding ocean, aptly named the Atlantic in his honor. Each of the other sons was given a smaller portion of the island and its surrounding islands to rule over. Poseidon carved the mountain where he and Cleito dwelt into a palace and surrounded it with 3 circular moats of increasing width that varied from 1 to 3 stadia, or approximately 600 to 1,800 feet. Each of these moats were separated by proportionally sized concentric rings of land. The Atlanteans built bridges north from the mountain, connecting it to the rest of the island. They dug a great canal to the sea and carved tunnels in the rings of rock for ships to pass into the city. Walls were built around each concentric ring on your way in, and guards manned all the gates and towers. A map of Atlantis, as described by Plato, was drawn by Athanasius Kircher in the 17th century, and is on your screen now. The map is oriented with south being at the top and north at the bottom. But according to Critias, 9,000 years before Plato, the great kingdom of Atlantis was devoured in a blink, swallowed up by the sea. Plato stated, "But afterwards there occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and in a single day and night of misfortune all your warlike men in a body sank into the earth, and the island of Atlantis in like manner disappeared into the depths of the sea. For which reason the sea in those parts is impassable and impenetrable, because there is a shoal of mud in the way, and this was caused by the subsidence of the island." But if Atlantis was a real place, why haven't we found it yet? Or perhaps we already have, and are simply unaware of what we are seeing. Let's take a look at 3 potential locations for Atlantis, and what makes each one intriguing, compelling, and all the more mysterious. We begin with the earliest theories as to Atlantis' foundation, impact on the world, and exact location. In 1882, Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, was published by Ignatius Donnelly. Donnelly's book speculated about many aspects of Atlantis, but assumed Plato's account of the location of Atlantis was thoroughly accurate and exact. This drawing showcases the location of Atlantis drawn up by Donnelly, but directed by the words of Plato himself. This location puts Atlantis in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, opposite the Mediterranean Sea. Donnelly claims that Atlantis was where civilization began. As the first civilization, it grew populous, and its descendants emigrated to the coasts of numerous regions across the world, forming new civilizations that became the foundation for everything throughout history. It was the true antediluvian world, the Garden of Eden from the Bible, where the first humans were created by God to live in paradise. The Garden of the Hesperides, from Greek mythology, where an orchard that is said to have encompassed Mount Atlas is home to a tree that bears golden apples and a mythical dragon that protects it. The Elysium Fields, where the Greek believed you went when you died. A paradise in the Western Ocean that would also be referred to as the Fortunate Isles. Or Asgard, home of the Norse gods that is said to surround the massive and sacred tree, Yggdrasil. Atlantis is the paradise all mankind and cultures throughout time reference as the Promised Land, the home to the first men and the golden age of civilization. The gods and goddesses of the Greeks, Phoenicians, Hindus, and Scandinavians were the kings, queens, and heroes of Atlantis. Real people from a different age that were lost to time, and whose stories were carried on through myth and legend. Donnelly believed the islands were struck by the powerful convulsions of nature, as described by Plato. The architecture and its people were buried beneath the sands, and the islands were swallowed up by the sea. The few people who had escaped in ships or on rafts would carry the tale to the nations of the world, east and west, news of the appalling catastrophe which would be preserved by peoples from many lands in the flood and deluge legends that are found across many cultures and religions today. And yet other theories take liberties with Plato's description of the location of Atlantis and find other ancient civilizations to be the inspiration behind the Atlantis tale. One of the most popular and interesting of these is the Minoans. The Minoans were a Bronze Age Aegean civilization that arose on the Greek island of Crete and its neighboring islands around 3500 BC. They built incredible works of architecture, including palaces up to 4 stories high. They were considered the first advanced civilization in Europe with their massive building complexes, sophisticated art, and full-fledged writing systems. The Minoan capital city of Knossos was said to be home to nearly 18,000 people during the first palace period around 2000 BC. Minos was the king of Knossos and is said to have colonized many Aegean islands and is credited with clearing the sea of pirates and increasing the flow of trade. Crete was famous for the development of their native resources, including oil, wine, and wool. Minoan pottery has been found in places such as Egypt, Syria, and mainland Greece. Their influence was felt on a massive scale. Greek mythology even directs its gaze to the ancient Minoans and King Minos of Crete. The tale of the Minotaur has Theseus, a prince from Athens, whose father was an ancient Greek king named Aegeus, for whom the Aegean Sea got its name, sail to Crete, where he was forced to fight a half-man, half-bull creature called a Minotaur. The Minotaur was said to be King Minos' son, who was kept in the labyrinth by order of the king himself. As the tale goes, the king's daughter, Ariadne, fell in love with Theseus. Before Theseus could enter the labyrinth, Ariadne gave him a ball of thread, which he unwound as he went deeper into the maze, so as to ensure he could find his way out. Theseus slayed the Minotaur, and then fled Crete with Ariadne to escape her father's wrath. The Minoans lasted more than 2,000 years before they met with a similar fate to the one commonly attributed to Atlantis. It is said that a massive volcanic explosion combined with an earthquake demolished much of the Minoan civilization, after which they quickly faded into history. The destruction of the Minoans was terrifying and abrupt, and many credit this ancient, fallen, advanced civilization as the real Atlantis that had inspired Plato's account. Another potential location for Atlantis has gained popularity in recent years. Referred to as the Reshat structure, it is a deeply eroded, slightly elliptical dome located in Mauritania in northwest Africa. It has a diameter of 40 kilometers, or 25 miles. The strange structure is of unknown origins, but those who believe this may be the location of Atlantis point to the concentric circles that appear as though they could be the moats of Atlantis, with the proportional rings of land separating them, and the palace at the center, as Plato had described in his dialogues. An ancient map drawn up based on the recountings of Herodotus, often referred to as the father of history, shows the northwest portion of Africa labeled as Atlantis, inside of which lies the Reshat structure. History has proven the existence of a real King Atlas that ruled over Mauritania before 500 BC. However, not much else is known about the king. The existence of King Atlas and Herodotus' labeling of modern-day Mauritania as Atlantis, named after its king, leads many to speculate that it may have been Plato's great lost city. In addition, many ancient handcrafted tools and apparent weaponry have been found on the outskirts of the Reshat. Alongside such artifacts, fossils of various sea creatures have been found near the structure, indicating to some that much of the surrounding area may have been underwater at some point. Advocates for the Reshat structure believe that perhaps the ocean levels were higher or the ground levels lower at some point in ancient history, and that the Reshat and its neighboring areas of Mauritania may have been surrounded by the waters of the Atlantic. This would account for Plato's description of its location. There are also some interesting topographical elements apparent in many photos of the Reshat, showing what looks like water erosion all around the structure and leading all the way out to the coast. Again, this seems to lend credence to theories that some catastrophic flood consumed the area at some point, perhaps wiping out the civilization that lived there and burying them beneath the sea, at least until more modern times. Many other locations have been proposed as the site for Atlantis, but none seem to match Plato's depiction as closely as these three. Have we already found Atlantis? Is it still sunk somewhere deep in the Atlantic that we have yet to uncover? Or perhaps it never existed at all? The definitive answer, at least for the moment, appears to be lost to time. But what do you think? Comment below and let us know. Also, feel free to let us know what other content you would like to see us cover on the channel. Thanks for watching. If you like our content and want to see more, be sure to subscribe and click the bell to turn on notifications so you can be alerted anytime we post new content. Also, check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you would like to help our channel grow, spread the word and share our videos. I'm your host, Patrick, and we'll see you next time on The Stranger Side.